Good.
I've got your beautiful painting hanging in my living room.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you still in Wilmington?
Yeah, same house, 41 years.
Fantastic. How's young Marna?
She's doing well. She just changed jobs. She'd been with the government forever and
Right.
now joined the utility industry, Exelon.
Oh, yeah. My brother-in-law works for them.
Oh, really? Ah.
Yep. In Baltimore.
Well, she's in D.C. She's in the general counsel's office, responsible for policy. So that's sort of, I guess, Washington's where a lot of that happens.
Awesome. Well, give her my best.
I will do that.
And thanks for tuning in.
You're still in Texas?
I'm in Pennsylvania right now, but yes, we're mostly in Texas. So our daughter's 9, and whenever she's in school, we're there. And now that school's out for, who knows how long now, but we're back in PA. It's too hot in Texas right now.
It is hot. I have to go to Houston in 2 weeks for a meeting.
Oh, well, that's where we are. So next time you have to go, let us know.
I will do that.
So trying to see who else is on here.
Heather, who you know is on, Dave.
Hi, Dave. It's Heather.
Hey.
Good to see you. Thanks again for doing this for us.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I'm honored.
Yeah, I think you're going to get a couple classmates here on the call too, which will be nice. I see Ben Kraft is on, and hopefully a few others.
Ben's gotten a lot younger. He looks about 6 years
multiplied.
old now. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, this is Bob Bird. I'm on, but I'm using somebody else's computer, so my surname is Admin.
Okay.
All right, Bob.
Good to see you, Admin.
Yeah, welcome, Admin. That's great.
Don't get too goofy.
So Melissa, I'll start whenever you want. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, usually, so we could wait until around 5 after, unless you want to get started now. We just
doesn't matter.
One more person just entered the waiting room. So let's wait until they're in, and then
I'll go ahead and kick it off.
And then Matt, you could get started with the introduction.
Sure. We got another one coming in. Okay, great.
Yeah, we always have a few later stragglers coming in here.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is Matt Twyman, Director of Alumni Relations. I want to thank everybody for coming today and joining us. This is our 3rd installment of the virtual Tower Talks, which have been great. And today we're honored to have an artist with us, David Larned, who is class of 1995. Some of you might be familiar with David. He actually participated in our artists and authors celebration we had for Centennial way back in September. So you might have seen his work, and we actually have someone on the line, Ms. Whittington, who actually has one of his works of art in her home. But for those of you who might not be familiar with David, like I said, he's a painter who is inspired by the visible world. He's dedicated to portraits, landscapes, and still life. And his paintings strive to capture the intensity of nature's beauty. After Tower Hill, David is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's Academy of Fine Arts, and the Florence Academy of Art. He also has been a recipient of several awards, including a repeat semi-finalist in the National Portrait Gallery's portrait competition. As you might have heard when you came on, he resides in Texas, but also spent some time in Pennsylvania with his wife, Sarah Lamb, who's also an accomplished artist as well. David today is going to share with us kind of his actual art studio that he shares with his wife, and share some of his paintings, kind of give us a virtual tour, if you will. So again, welcome to David, class of 1995, and thank you for doing this. We really do appreciate it. So without any further ado, I'll give you David. We'll turn it over to him and have him take us on a little tour.
All right. Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. I think you about covered it. I think that's all I have to say. So when you become a painter, one of the problems is, where do you paint? You have to find a space. And unlike becoming a lawyer or a doctor, where you have a law firm or a hospital waiting for you, you have to create a space. And so at first I was at the DCCA, which is in Wilmington, Delaware, and then realized I wanted to build a space. And so met my wife in New York, and she's also an artist. And so we decided to build a studio on an old farm. That's where we are right now. I'll try and show you the gist. So this is in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. And this is the old barn ruin, which was a cattle farm originally. And then there's a house over there, which is where we live. And then there's this outbuilding here, which we decided would be a perfect studio. So the first thing you need to do with a studio is find north light. And this building was oriented such that it faced the north. So artists have always used north light to illuminate their paintings and the studios they work in if they're in the northern hemisphere, because north light is constant all day long. So your subject looks the same at 8 in the morning as it would at 4 in the afternoon, which is critical if you're trying to paint realistically. So what I'm doing right now is I'm walking around the back side to show you the most important part of the studio, which would be the windows. There's our garden. So here we go. So this is the north side of the studio. And if you look, there's windows and skylights. The ones on the left are Sarah's, the ones on the right are mine. So there's a wall that divides our spaces. And one of the construction questions was whether or not there should be a door between two spaces. And I said, absolutely not. To preserve our marriage, we better not to see each other for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and in between. She said there absolutely should be one, so of course she won. So we do have a door in between. So I'll walk back to the front of the studio and show you the inside. Does this come out pretty well on your screens?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, we can see it. It's great.
Okay. All right. So this is my studio. And now you're seeing the window and skylight that we saw from the outside. So when I work, or when any artist works, they work with this very specific light that kind of rakes down at a 45-degree angle. So it's falling over your shoulder onto your canvas in such a way that it doesn't create glare. And what you're looking at now is the painting I'm working on. So on the left is the photograph of the subject. On the right is the painting that I'm working on. So this one's probably about halfway through. It's starting to look like that person. But here's the basic setup. You've got the window, my brushes, palette, and then painting. So if the subject were actually sitting for the portrait, they would be sitting on the left instead of a photograph. It would be the actual person. And so what I do is enlarge the photograph so it looks to be the same as a person would be in real life. So this photograph's probably 45 inches or something like that tall. So that way it minimizes the difference between painting from life and painting from a photograph. It's as if she's really there. So I'll walk you around. There's something here that some people might have a connection to. This is just a model that I hired, trying to get the glare off, to pose for a portrait, but he's posing in Ellis Wasson's robes from Cambridge. So I painted Dr. Wasson years and years ago. I think it might have been my first commission outside of Tower Hill. And then I asked him if I could borrow these robes because they're such an interesting design element for a portrait. And he said yes. So that would be just a demonstration piece. Over here is the last painting I finished, which is a young guy, probably mid-20s. Here's another demonstration piece. This is a little girl. It's framed. So this one just got photographed for my website and will be returned to the owner shortly. This charcoal drawing here is a student work from the Florence Academy. One of the ways artists learn to paint is by studying the human form. And before artists are allowed to paint in color, they have to learn to draw. So just line and form and tone. And so this would be a student work, probably second year at the Florence Academy. So the basic trajectory from Tower Hill was to go to college, get a degree, which is my parents' requirement, and then I could go paint. And so Ultimately ended up at the Florence Academy, which was enormously important as far as what I do now aesthetically. There is a portrait of my wife right there. That was the year we got married. The original is in Texas. This is just a copy. This is a president of a club, which has yet to be delivered. Down here is a charcoal self-portrait. Another way that artists learn to paint is to study themselves. And so that's a model that's always willing and available and free yourself. So that's a charcoal drawing I did at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. These are paintings from the Florence Academy done by my teachers. So this would be the next step after you master charcoal drawing like this of the human form, and you pass satisfactorily. They'll give you a palette and colors, and you can start to paint. So this is the largest painting I've ever done, and it lives in my studio because it can't get out. It's too big. This is a still life of a kerosene can I painted a long time ago. These are canvases that are prepared but haven't been started yet. So these are forthcoming portrait commissions. And portraits are pretty much what I do full time. I've got a backlog that keeps me too busy to do landscape or still life or anything else. These are charcoal studies. So sometimes before a finished painting, an artist will do a study and analyze the pose, or this is a portrait that my teacher did of me in Florence Academy. And he thought I was so old school, so he gave me this really wacky collar like Velasquez would have had. These are charcoal drawings by a hero of mine, Charles Weed. And so that's pretty much my studio. This is my office. This is where I work and spend my life. After you leave school, the most important thing becomes your books. These become your teachers. So the artists from the past. I look at these constantly whenever I'm trying to work something out in my paintings. So there we go. I'm open to questions to kind of flesh out all the gaps in between. So if anyone wants to lead off, feel free.
Sure, and this is Melissa again. I'm happy to take questions via chat if that's best for everyone. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, feel free to type it in the chat and I'll read it out loud for Dave.
This is Matt. I do have one question, David. You mentioned that the painting you were doing of the lady was almost done.
Yep.
It looked great to me. How, on average, how long would you think it takes you to actually go from beginning to end? How many hours do you typically put in on a particular painting?
It depends on the scale. So the larger the painting, the more complex the background, the longer it takes. So on a really small painting, it might take me 2 weeks. On a really big painting, it might take me 2 months. Wow. And we keep banker's hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. This kind of art isn't the kind of art where you wake up at 2 in the morning with inspiration and decide dash something off. This is very much, there's no way around time behind the easel. It's just it's a gradual building up of the layers of paint. It's a slow old school process, which is what the Florence Academy taught. So the way I paint is not revolutionary or new. It builds on the master apprentice system. So the teacher who taught me was taught by someone from the 1950s, who was taught by someone in the 1800s, and so on and so forth, all the way back to the Renaissance, where they passed on this method. So it's a slow process, but I find it a beautiful one.
Yeah, they look great. They look great. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Very cool.
Thank you.
We do have 3 questions in the chat. The next one is, who have you painted from the Tower Hill community?
Oh, a lot of people, probably. Well, I think initially one of the first portraits that was really important career-wise was Governor DuPont, who had recently, I think, had the art space, the new art space, or then new art space at Tower Hill done. I think he donated something to help that along, and his wife commissioned me to paint his portrait for the family. And I think he went to Tower Hill a long, long time ago before he went elsewhere. And then his wife liked the painting so much that she had me paint her for the state of Delaware. So at that time, Governor Minner thought the first ladies of the state should be painted in addition to the governors. And so she started a program to have all the past first ladies painted. And so I painted First Lady Elise Pont and then a bunch of others from the state. So that was an early one from the Tower Hill community that really opened up a lot of doors in Delaware for other portraits. But I think even this guy that initially showed you, I don't know if anyone on this chat knows Ian Harrington, but I think Ian probably went to Tower Hill at some point. That would be the only person in the studio right now that has a Tower Hill connection. But Ellis Wasson was an early one too, and that was super fun. It was nice to be in his presence and not have to be graded on anything I was doing.
Awesome. Very
okay,
cool.
I'm back.
Yeah, there you're back. The next question we have is, as for your books, what's an example of something you needed help on from a book?
Probably boring technical stuff. Aside from the books too, one of the great things is having my wife next door. So whenever I have a question or need a pair of fresh eyes on something, I'll just go through that door that, you know, luckily she insisted on, and have her come over and say, I think this is, you know, too red or too dark, or you need to make this edge softer. And that's enormously helpful to have her. The books are also inspiration. I think when you're trying to come up with a new composition, it actually helps to look backwards and see what other artists did to resolve those compositional issues. Sometimes you just also don't like the way you're painting and want to go a different direction, and so you look at the books to see how say Sargent would have handled a lighting issue or come up with a new pose.
Oh, that's fascinating. So that actually kind of bridges over to a question that I had, which was, who are your favorite artists? Like, who are you most drawn to, both past and present?
So Sargent, as far as what I do now, would definitely be probably at the top of the list. He created modern portrait painting, and it's really never wavered too much from that. Going back, Vermeer, Velázquez, all painters that painted people. It's interesting, when we go to museums, my wife will gravitate towards the still life paintings because that's what she's passionate about, and I'm more into portraits. And so pretty much most artists in a museum that painted people, I'll have an interest in. But aesthetically, artists that use their eyes more than their mind. So Sargent was a very visual painter. He was not thinking about what he saw. He was just responding to what he saw. So you'll look at really early portrait paintings and you can see that the artists weren't using their eyes. They were drawing noses because they, in their mind, knew them to be triangular. But when you get to someone like Sargent or even Velázquez, a nose stops being triangular and becomes a smudge of color or a tone. And it's actually a much more accurate way to portray reality than thinking about it as a nose, just seeing it reacting in terms of pure color and form. So any artist that believes or painted in that way would be someone that I would be attracted to.
Oh, that's awesome. We have another one, which is kind of it's similar to what you just answered, but if you have anything to add, how were you drawn to portraits over landscapes or other types of painting?
I think the market told me I was a portrait painter.
Yeah.
I think you know, I had a show with landscapes and still life and portraits and figure paintings, and some of them sold a little bit, and then the portraits, I had a backlog of commissions from that first point on. But there's a reason for that, probably because I was drawn to portraits more than I was drawn to still life or landscape. I think that's what I'm intrinsically motivated to do is paint people. I find them just so challenging technically. I think the psychology of the subject is endlessly fascinating, sometimes frustrating. But I think that keeps me more engaged. I found landscape painting very frustrating because the lighting changes constantly. Going back to how important the north light is in the studio, having the light be the same so you can analyze things over a long period of time and they don't change. I think personality comes into it. I think portrait painters tend to be very analytical. If you meet, I remember in art school in the cafeteria, you could pretty much look at the students in the cafeteria and decide who they were. You know, the printmakers were these very meticulous people with glasses and sharp pencils, and the sculptors would be the guys with the motorcycles outside and the jean jackets, and painters like myself are probably more neurotic or something. I don't know, but I think personality has a lot to do with it. And most artists would say that it wasn't a conscious decision to become a painter or a sculptor. It was something they just gravitated towards over time, and that was definitely the case for me. So I had no intention at Tower Hill or even later to become a painter, but at some point I realized this is what I was really passionate about more than anything else, and I should at least give it a try, even though it seems crazy.
That's awesome. Very cool. So then we have a question from Otto. Do you paint all the copies of your paintings?
Do
you paint all the copies of your paintings?
No. So that copy is actually a high-res scan of the original. So they can copy the painting and print it on canvas, so it actually looks like an original, and you can frame it just like the original, and you'd never know the difference unless you were a painter.
Very cool. This one, I think, so it's slightly different. Who is your favorite artist? Is it the same answer? Sargent?
Sargent would definitely, if I could have one in my house, yeah, I'd be pretty happy with the Sargent. I mean, I'm not sure there was ever a more talented American to pick up a paintbrush. But Velázquez too, he was really groundbreaking. Going back to what I was saying earlier about using your eyes, there's a great famous painting, I think, in the Prado of a Velázquez, and it's a woman spinning yarn. And until that point, you would have seen all the spokes on the spinning wheel, but Velázquez was using his eyes. Uh-oh, I just lost y'all. Sorry.
We can still hear you.
Okay, let me try and get back. But Velázquez was painting the wheel, and it was just a blur, no spokes. And so this was this like huge leap forward in terms of visual perception. So yeah, I'd be happy to have that painting too in my collection.
And what's your favorite work that you've done? Is it on display in your studio right now?
I think most artists would say it's whatever they're working on right now. You tend to live in that painting, and then as soon as it's done, you move on to something else. I mean, emotionally, probably painting my daughter and my wife. Those are probably my favorite paintings. But you're always so engaged in your current project. That's what you're dedicated to and living in, and waking up in the middle of the night feeling like, oh, I wish I had done this, or I need to try this in the morning. So yeah, hopefully the painting you're working on is always the one that you're most engaged in at the moment.
Makes good sense. Here we have, this is kind of a two-part or three-part question. Were portraits always your intention and preference, or is that where you found your talent excelled? Do you prefer working with a live model or with a photo, and do you take the photo?
Mm-hmm. If I can remember the stumbled in just like painting. When I was at Tower Hill, I was doing large abstract paintings, and there was certainly no consciousness that I was going to become a portrait painter or even a representational painter. It just slowly happened over time. And then as far as life versus photos, I find there's pros and cons to both. For commission portraiture, I think the photo is a wonderful tool because you can show the subject matter before you start. Here's the concept, here's the pose, here's the expression, and they sign off on it. There's no surprise at the end. It also is obviously perfectly still, so you're not fighting with a non-professional model to get what you need. Now, if you have a professional model, it can be really fun to paint from life. But I think for commission portraiture, photographs are definitely the way to go. And then the last one, taking the photos. I definitely prefer to take the photo. That's a large part of the image because you want to compose it the way you want. You want to light it the way you want. You want to conjure their emotion. A lot of times you'll be painting a dead person, and that's not ideal because you never got to work with the sitter. So you might have a great photograph, but it might not translate into the purpose of the commission perfectly. So a lot of times institutions will posthumously have someone painted, and your hands as an artist are somewhat tied. You can only reproduce what the photo looked like in paint. You can't actually say what you want as a painter. So ideally, I'd always prefer to take the photos myself. Even though I'm not a photographer, I can get what I need for my photos as resource material for the paintings. I get what I need, but as far as any sort of photographic merit, I'm probably a terrible photographer.
Good.
That's great.
I had it.
Oh, sorry. We do have, I think, two more questions, if that's okay.
Right.
I think we're doing okay on time. This is from Ellen Cannon. What does David think of the Obama's portraits in the National Gallery, especially since they got so much publicity?
Yeah, I think they're fun. I think with a lot of contemporary art, a lot of representational painters or traditional painters like myself have a real problem with contemporary art. And I look at it as something completely different. It's as similar to what I do as investment banking is. It's just different. So I think they're fun. I don't think technically it's what I would want to have done. I think Michelle's got a lot more attention. And I think that was pretty cool because it made the artist, made her career. Whereas Barack's portrait painter was already very famous. He's got some huge paintings in the Brooklyn Museum. But yeah, to each his own. It's not. It didn't change what I did with my work. But I think they're fun.
Awesome. And then we have another question from Otto. Have you ever painted on anything other than canvas?
Sure. Canvas is relatively expensive. So as an art student, canvas was a luxury. You can paint on pretty much any surface. Paper, you just have to prepare it with gesso, because oil paint will eat through a lot of substances. So you have to protect the substance with a barrier. So you put gesso on top of paper, cardboard. You really paint on anything. Copper. It depends on, ultimately, it depends on the texture that you like the brush to feel like. And so for me, I like a pretty fine linen for portrait work that's exacting. You can't have too much texture. But some people paint on board, masonite, which is not archival, so you won't do that long term. But as a student or just for something fun, you could do that. Copper is very slick, so has no tooth to it, which would be a nightmare for me. It's like painting on an ice rink. I like linen works well. So cotton or canvas is a pretty generic term. What most paintings are on is actually linen.
Interesting. Thank you. And I think that's all for the questions in the chat. Matt, did you have an additional question?
I did. David, you talked about when you were giving your intro and speech a little bit about how you kind of had to go to college to kind of satisfy mom and dad, and you kind of got
right.
What would be your message to those students that might be interested in pursuing a career in art, but they're kind of grappling with the parents who might be more, you got to do something else.
Yeah.
What kind of advice do you give, and what would you kind of tell them to do? Because I think that's a real life thing. Definitely,
it is, and I think it's important for the student to realize that the parents, even though they might be fighting the student's wish to become an artist, are doing it for the right reasons. And in some ways, I think adversity is great, because you should not become a painter unless you're absolutely determined to become a painter. I think that's probably the most important ingredient to being a successful artist, is that hell or high water, you're going to do it. And so maybe you're going to find a way after you go to school and get your regular degree to become a painter. And if you're destined to become a painter, you will find that path towards it, which was definitely my case. I was not excited about getting a degree. I wanted to paint. And I guess as a dutiful child, I said, sure, as long as the deal is you'll send me to where I want to go afterwards. And they did. And now they take credit for it, of course, and they saw this working out all along.
That was the master plan, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. But yes, I think it's daunting as a kid to have something. If you were like me and you have this 4-year college in the way of what you want to do, it's pretty tough. The other tricky thing, art school wise, is that art is not like chemistry or history 101. Where you go to school is enormously important. In my mind, calculus is calculus, whether you go to Stanford or Trinity. It's the same stuff. Painting is wildly different. You go to Stanford and their teacher has a very different idea of what art is versus the teacher at Trinity. So you really have to study, do your homework as to what school is best for your interest in art. And that's tough because you don't, like I said, your interest in art goes in a wavy fashion. It's not linear. So maybe when you're a junior in high school, your idea of what you want art-wise is not where you're going to be in 3 years. So that's a really tough thing. And maybe art school is better after college when you have a better sense of what you're looking for.
Sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Very good. I guess the one last question that I have that I think you touched on the fact that you seek your wife's opinion for some of your work. Are there any works that you've actually collaborated on?
Let's see. No, I don't. Not on the same canvas.
Okay.
But I think, like I was saying, we have this rule: no unsolicited critiques, but we're always asking for critiques. And she can't barge in and say this looks terrible, and I can't do the same thing. But they're like, even just this morning, the painting behind me that I was working on, I called her in to help me with the girl's hair because I don't know about girls' hair, and she said it looks too green. And I said, well, that's what it looks like to me, and she said she wouldn't like it like that. So in that way, she probably saved the commission. I probably would have been rejected because the hair color wasn't right, but she was able to point me the right direction. I could warm up the hair and make it a little bit more accurate. So I think we collaborate that way, and it's fun at cocktail hour when we can talk about art. If she were in a different profession, we wouldn't have the same language, and so there is probably collaboration going on behind the scenes in a less direct way. There's probably more going on than I realize.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a fantastic presentation. A little different than the Tower Talks that we've hosted to date, which is really, really fun. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Mr. Weymouth, was that thumbs up or was that a question? Thumbs up. All right.
Is that Timo?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Hey, Timo.
Thumbs up.
Great. Thanks for tuning in.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We have David here. I want to be sensitive to his time, but I want to give everyone an opportunity if they have a question and ask a question.
I have one more comment from Ellen Cannon, just saying, your work is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh,
and I also received another comment, more of a question that I will hit you with later, David, but someone on the audience wanted to know if you'd be willing to do a tower term, which we'll talk about later, but it's an opportunity maybe to share your knowledge and your skills with some of your students. They were very impressed with what you did today.
Cool. Sure.
Very good.
They might have to come to Houston.
We'll take care of it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining our tower term. Stay tuned. We probably will try to have a few more of these, but thank you to David once again. It was very nice of you. We appreciate you kind of letting us into your studio and very personal work. Thank you for doing that today.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, David.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.